All right, well, thank you everyone for joining today. We're going to be going over a purchasing overview for our TMCC friends. So first, we're just going to start off with what you're going to learn today. So the agenda today, we have a variety of different items we're going to go over today. So we'll just do a quick procurement overview, touch on spend categories and supplier registration. We got our procurement options, and then we go through all those different procurement options. We also will touch on insurance requirements, license and certifications, contracts, as Adriel mentioned. She'll briefly talk about contracts. And then throughout, we'll talk about the different resources that are available, but I'll go over any of those and recap all of those, and that way you have access to those resources. So we're going to first start off with a procurement overview. Some of you that have been here for a while, this is the same thing that we say all the time, but just so you know, in case you're new, we are all part of Business Center North. So that includes all these institutions here. Our department in purchasing handles all of these areas. So we are here to help all of you. So hopefully you all have bookmarked the BCN purchasing website. That is going to be a helpful one. That has some of our forms. It has the purchasing guidelines that are very helpful for you to have. It has information on our assets, has information for suppliers, and many more things on there. So make sure you're bookmarking that. I will also be talking about looking at spend category lists, contact us information. That is also all located on our BCN purchasing website. So a new thing that we just added was a contact us. And so it actually has the general responsibilities of each buyer. So in case you're not understanding which spend category to use, that will also list all of the buyers and what general areas they're covering. So that way you know who to reach out to, especially as I just mentioned, we have a few new buyers on our list. And so that way you know who is handling what and how we're transitioning into items. So definitely check that out. That's going to be a helpful tool. And I'll talk about that a few times as we go through. So we're primarily, of course, just concentrating on procurement when it comes to purchase orders, requisitions. But just so you have a whole overview of everything that's in Workday, everything that's included. So we're going to touch on spend categories. We're going to talk about supplier registration. And then we're going to talk about some supplier invoice requests. And then, of course, highly look at requisitions and purchase orders. But just a high-level view of everything that's included under procurement. So let's get started and we'll talk about some fun spend categories. So what are spend categories? So these spend categories, if you're not familiar with them, they provide an operational detail of expense activity that maps to expense ledger account. And it's required on any operational transaction. So like what we're going to go over today, requisitions, invoices, expense reports. And for our purposes, it also helps us to determine trackable items that become like fixed assets, as well as those that are sensitive items like firearms, computers, and laptops. The main thing that we want to talk about today is to remember about a spend category. And sometimes people, especially if you're new to them or if you don't know which one to pick, we want to make sure that when you're doing a spend category for a requisition, you want to make sure that you're selecting ones on what is being purchased. So that's a big one to emphasize on what is being purchased. It's not for what the reason is or the company that you're buying from or not the why. It's actually what is that item, what it actually is. And it's really critical that, especially on a reporting side of things, that we make sure that it's accurate as possible. So with that, when you're choosing the spend categories, we want to make sure that we're just not picking any general or miscellaneous items because you're thinking, oh, that's the only one that makes sense to me. We really want to make sure that we're finding that spend category, again, that is what is being purchased on there. So to make sure you're choosing the appropriate one, just a few little tips on there is just make sure that, again, you're finding what is being purchased and really paying attention to those spend categories because some of the wording can be a little bit the same. So an example of that is like purchasing a laptop. You want to make sure you're finding that spend category that applies to purchasing that actual computer laptop. You want to make sure you're not using something that was for computer accessories or some kind of peripherals or anything like that. So that could be mixed up. So make sure you're paying attention to some of those that come across. Another example can be like for food items, you want to make sure that you're selecting the correct ones depending on if it's catering or food items that you're selecting from there. I'm going to go over for when you're in Workday on the next slide. Some of you have seen this before. You can start actually typing in, or it'll give you a selection from what you're actually starting to buy. It'll give you some recommendations from there, but we'll talk about that on the next slide. Again, we want to really recommend avoiding any of those general or miscellaneous. I know sometimes you're like, I have no idea where this is going to go. This is going to be the best one. It's not the end of the world if you do that, but the buyers will reach back out and say, hey, this spin category would be the best one for this. Can you please change that? Or I'm going to change that if I'm allowed to. That way you can make sure that it's the correct one. If you don't know, just like I talked about, we have that contact us list. If you don't know which spin category to pick, and you don't know, of course, if the spin category, you don't know what buyer to reach out to, you can find out what general area that buyer covers and reach out to them. And if it's not the right person, they'll get you to the right person, or they'll also help you. Everyone's very cross-functional and can help out where needed. So it's important to reach out to the buyers and find out which one would work best. Or if you have an exception of one, like, I don't know what to put for this, how do I separate these out? The buyers can be able to help you with that. So that way there's no delays when you're submitting those requisitions from there. We do have a list of our, these things don't want to move. It went backwards again. We do have a spin category list at our BCN purchasing website. So that is the spin category assignments. At UNR, we're a little spoiled. We have a thing called Workday Tools that helps us to be able to just type in really quickly, but we make sure that we offer a spreadsheet that shows what buyer is listed to that spin category, or you can just filter it by the spin category item and then see which one works out best for you. You can do a control find and start typing, and it can be able to find on those different goods or services what actually matches what you need from there. So we just updated the spin category assignments with our new employees that just started. So that way, that's the most updated one that is on our website right now. And again, if you can't find one that you need, or you don't know which one to pick, on our Contact Us page, we do have that information regarding on what buyers to reach out to from there. Another bullet point that is on here is making sure that you don't want to, when you're picking a spin category, be very thoughtful about if you're doing a goods type requisition, let's say, and then you're going to go and pick a spin category for a type of service. So if you're only doing a goods and then you go and find a service, that of course is not going to work. So make sure that you're paying attention to those. And then any of the ones that are incorrect, they usually will be sent out for correction. There's some that we can make and just make that for you and say, oh, just so you know, this is the spin category that you can do. But just in case, if the spin category is on a different ledger, we can't make that correction as a buyer in Workday. So we'll have to send that back to you, and it'll go back through with routing. So that's why it's really important to pick the correct spin category from there. And then for the Workday, if you've noticed, when you start typing in the item description, the machine learning will start to see what spin category that it would be suggested. Sometimes it could be a little off if it doesn't understand it, or if it was a new spin category, it might not pop up. But typically this works really well. That way you can instantly start picking. But again, just like this example, I put laptop, you want to make sure that you're picking the correct one. You don't want to just see computers and then automatically pick computer accessories. So that's why it's important to make sure you're looking at those, or looking at the list and making sure you're picking the correct spin category from there. But it's a helpful little tool that has on there for in Workday. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to add on what? And I see we have a quick note. TMCC requests like the what and why from whom and memos. The SE is accurate, and more importantly, that the correct account is awesome. I love that. We want to make sure those are all correct. I appreciate the gatekeeping there. That's awesome. That helps our buyers out tremendously. Anybody else have anything to add or have any questions on spin categories before we move on? Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to talk about the supplier registration process. So just a really quick recap. But before I get into this, I just want to note, just so you guys know, because we're just going through this. So in the near future, we are actually moving to a new system NG-wide. It's a supplier gateway, and it is actually be very helpful, and we're super excited about it. But we have to do our onboarding and integrations and get everything set up. So we are hoping, if we can be done before summer, that would be amazing. But they said it's at least a 12-week process. We're just getting started with it. We got everything signed and approved. So just getting started with the onboarding process and meetings. But the supplier gateway will replace a lot of the systems that we do have. So supplier registration has been our lifesaver. So that way we can track all of our suppliers that we are actually doing business with. Right now, you'll continue to use that until our supplier gateway is ready to go. But also Supplier Gateway will actually give us access to track the insurance now. So right now we use My COI. That has also been a lifesaver for us instead of us doing a spreadsheet and tracking it that way. And so we are thankful for all these systems, but it's going to be nice to be able to have everything in one spot. The Supplier Gateway is also going to be a wonderful system because it's going to help us on the administration side who have to handle this supplier registration administration. We have to do a lot of different customer service. So we have to reach back out to suppliers if they're having any troubles with their registration or adding any new admins to their account, or they have troubles with their bank accounts or their W-9s or any of those items. We have to be able to help them with that. And we're always happy to, but what's nice with this new system, they are going to be able to provide that customer service. So that's going to be able to free up our time. So that way we're not too worried about adding people or helping them with their self-registration. Another cool feature about the Supplier Gateway is that as we get started with it and we evolve, we'll have all those suppliers in there. But what's nice is any of those, and you probably have experiences, people who want to do work with us. They think they have to apply in the supplier registration, but this is only people who are doing work with us because we don't want to go through the validation of actually doing them if they're just going to hopefully get work with us, and that's not going to help them get work with us. So with the Supplier Gateway, it's actually going to be able to offer a potential supplier. So that way, in case you're looking for a different type of supplier, those will also be listed too. Another thing that will be different too is that everyone will have access to it. So it'll be a single sign-on, so everyone can have access to be able to go look through and see the information that they're allowed to see from insurance, the supplier ready to go, what's the information, where are they at. So right now you can only go find supplier and see a little bit of information, but soon you'll be able to have a little bit more from there. So we're very excited about it. We're very excited to have many different options in there. It'll take a little bit more communication and information and training will be sent out to everybody. But I just wanted to give everyone a heads up of some exciting news that we're looking forward to, especially as we're transitioning and getting new people into our office. This will free up a lot of time for us once we get this set up from there. But for right now, we're using, of course, SReg since our supplier registration. And just so you know, or in case you're new to it, we, of course, want to make sure that we are having our suppliers that we are doing work with, making sure they are registered in the supplier registration. There are a few approval phases from there. So the first phase approval, that is approval by procurement. So our SReg admins will go through and do the initial review of the account, make sure the W-9 information looks correct. And then if everything looks good, they'll move on to phase 2 approval, which that is done by accounts payable. Accounts payable reviews that and does their IRS checks and make sure that everything is good before they actually approve them and accept it. And then that will reflect in Workday. Another phase that you may see when you go and look up a find supplier is supplier update. So even if a supplier was accepted before, they'll be moved into supplier update. Let's say they started to change stuff on their account and they needed to update their bank account information, they'll be in supplier update. Or let's just say they started to make updates and they have an old W-9. We will put them in supplier update because we want the most updated W-9 in there. So they will have to make sure to do that. So if you see them in supplier update, that means that they need to update something. Reach out to the Supplier Registration Admin. We have that on here. Patrick Jackson, if you have any questions on why is this person still in supplier update, they should be moved to accepted, or where should they be at, he can help you locate that information and find out maybe what we're waiting on. Sometimes it happens very little, but it does happen. Sometimes we're waiting on something and it doesn't automatically move them into the first phase. And so sometimes we have to track that. If we're waiting on them to update their W-9, we'll go back through and make sure that we move them into phase 1 from there. So sometimes it could just be a holding pattern and we didn't realize that was happening. So sometimes those do get stuck from there. If you are working with any suppliers, the link is here. It's also available on the Workday training resource. So hopefully I can show you at the end if anybody is new to that. But in Workday, you can go to the general navigation menu and go to the apps and you'll see Workday training resources. We have a BCN purchasing section. So that way you all can have access to what we supply in our knowledge base for UNR. So that way everyone has the same information. And of course, we tailor it towards all of BCN. It's not just UNR information in there. But in there, you have information about all the supplier registration. So if you are helping a supplier or need to give them a little bit more information and don't want to have to wait for a response on an email, that information is located in that article there on NC Supplier Registration, and it helps you through all of that. Another area that helps you right now as you find supplier and you go and look up a supplier, you're wondering what those status means. So I just went over a few statuses, but maybe there's a different one and you don't know what it means. In that NC Supplier Registration job aid, it actually lists out all the different statuses that you would see so then you understand where it would probably be located and where it is at. And of course, if you have any questions regarding a supplier invoice related, you of course reach out to your accounts payable department. But if it's anything for purchase order related or they need help with SReg, you can reach out to Patrick Jackson. Or you can also contact the main, and I can supply that later, the main NC SReg admin group. There's a bunch of them on there that can also help and make sure that the supplier moves on. So a little bit more long-winded than I wanted, but I wanted to update you regarding the supplier gateway. So exciting news from there. So now we're going to move on to the procurement option. Is there any questions so far before I move on to all the different options? And it gives me a chance to drink some water. Awesome. I'll take quiet as we are doing good then. Okay, so now we're going to go over our different procurement options, and then we'll move into requisitions and purchase orders. So first, we always like to start off with our 2 slides that talk about non-construction thresholds and then construction-related thresholds from there. We're not going to spend tons of time on the construction area, but we just always like to point these out. So especially if you're new, that way everyone understands the different thresholds. And then also too, what I'm going to show you today has been tweaked a little bit and updated. The information that's out on the Workday training resources is still relevant, but we have actually started to revamp we have the visual that has the guide of the different thresholds. It's a nice visual that goes along with the wording that's on the slides right now. We are in the midst of updating that so that way you guys can actually, it's broken down a little bit better because it was a little confusing on some spots, like what is 1 quote, what's 2 quotes. So we broke that down a little bit better. So it's just a format updates mostly. All the information that there is still current from there. So on here, the first slide, we're going to talk about anything that's not construction related first. So as you see, we'll start from the top. So of course, it depends on what your institution's small dollar threshold is. And I think TMCC, you're still at 2,000, correct? So anything that is under that 2,000 should be used on a P card. Of course, unless it's for a service that required insurance or licenses. So that's really important. Or if it's ongoing purchase, that should be on like a blanket purchase order. And that would be the exception of, let's say, like utilities from there. And then we'll talk about supplier invoice requests also here in a little bit. The next section is kind of all together, but we'll go through each of those little thresholds. So under the quote approved contract or approved competitive exception, So anything that is between that, of course, 2000 and 2499 will require a requisition and only requires one quote to be attached. We can also tie an existing contract if that's available. And that could be either from like a result of a formal solicitation that our office has done or through one of the cooperative organizations that we do work with. We do always encourage, though, multiple quotes just so we just get the best advantage for us financially, but only one quote is required for that threshold from there. So for the non-professional goods and the services, that next line there, so between the 25,000 and the 499, two quotes are required or an approved competitive exception, or again, a contract that we just mentioned that we have already formally solicited or we have a cooperative contract. For any non-construction professional services, that last line there between the 25,000 and the 74,999, the same threshold applies from there. So let's see, I was like, if I have a good example, one of the examples we've given before, so if the non-professional goods and services between the 25 to 499 would be, let's say, like janitorial services. So it's good to have the two quotes on that.
Des, can I jump in for a second?
Go ahead.
Okay. On the competitive quotes, and I don't know, Jamie can maybe correct me if I'm wrong because she deals with it more, but there's when you're offering competitive quotes, sometimes there's like a long laundry list of items looking to be procured, and it can be hard for the buyer to figure out, especially when the line items are very heavily coded to compare apples to apples. So if you are submitting a secondary quote for comparison, it really helps us speed up our process in reviewing if you're able to somehow flag or mark which items are being compared. Sometimes it's really simple because it's just a one item quote and a one item quote. But when it comes and it's a lot of items lined out, oftentimes the second quote doesn't have them in the same order. They may call them something slightly different, and it can be hard for us because we're not experts in the product being listed to make an accurate comparison. So if you are submitting multiple quotes to show that you want to go with the lowest quote, that is really helpful for us. And I don't know that TMCC has a huge issue with this, but it's one that I have seen consistently that slows down buyers in just processing your requisition.
Thank you, Adriel. Okay, and then the last part of the non-construction is our formal solicitation options, of course. So as you can see here, you have your request for proposal, so more than the 74,999, and it's not construction related. And you have also your invitation to bid, so more than 499. And then, of course, we do have some of those exceptions from there. And you definitely always want to make sure you're reaching out to find out if those exceptions would be approved or if it falls under any of those. Just want to make sure I had all the...
Yeah, I'll jump in one more time. I don't know if everyone knows the difference between a request for proposal or an invitation to bid, or why we pick one over the other. The quick and dirty explanation is we use an ITB when lowest price is the most important deciding factor. Anytime we use an invitation to bid, we are required to award the lowest responsible bidder. So that means whoever submits a bid that's a valid bid, that they don't, offer you something that you didn't ask for that costs less. It has to actually be what you were asking for. Then they get awarded de facto. A request for a proposal is when something aside from price needs to be considered. It could be the quality, it could be the delivery method or timeline. When other factors come in aside from price, then we use a request for proposal, and the way it's awarded is with an evaluation committee that reviews the evaluation criteria that are set out in advance. You have to set up the criteria before the bid goes, or the proposal RFP goes out. So RFPs are used when something aside from price. Like price can still be considered and be an important factor, but it's not the only factor in making a decision. So it's possible to award someone who might have been more expensive than another bidder, but what else they're offering makes this proposal a better proposal to accept.
Thank you. I appreciate the additional notes on that. It's very helpful. And then just briefly, this is just the construction related items. So we'll just briefly talk about that because your area, the facilities area, does a great job on all this area. But just so you know, on the two little parts here, so there are certain thresholds, or of course they're dictated by the NRS. So the Nevada revised statutes. So we just need to make sure we follow those. So anything between the $25,000 and $999 requires 3 competitive quotes. For some of those can be things like painting, flooring, HVAC, or anything that requires a contractor's license. A lot of people can think that construction related always means like renovations or building a whole new building, but that's not always the case. So it can be anything that requires a contractor's license to perform, especially with any of the architecture and engineering services. We require that we evaluate 3 firms for that. Because we're not permitted to award those based on the lowest price. Now, the last portion of anything that's over the $999, that's construction related or the architect and engineering services, those need to be formally solicited from there. Does anybody have any questions or follow-up from what me and Adriel have shared regarding the procurement thresholds? Perfect. So just a brief overview. It's helpful to use that information that is in the Workday training resources, especially if you're new and you're trying to learn the different thresholds or you haven't done one in a while, because sometimes it's a lot to remember on what is accepted and what you need to make sure you're putting in for the requisition. Okay, so another one of our procurement options is supplier invoice request. We also called it the SIR. So we recommend using the SIRs for any kind of small dollar transactions, typically when the supplier doesn't accept a P card or no tangible goods or services are being received. An example of this could be utility payments, memberships, certifications. We see those a lot for permits and fees. Definitely, just like what we just talked about, you want to make sure you're following the thresholds, and you want to make sure that if it can be paid on a P card and it doesn't fall under some of those examples, you want to make sure you're using the correct procurement method. But if you need to be able to use this again for the utility payment, certification, membership, instead of using a requisition and having to go through all the whole process, you can be able to just use the SIR. Just make sure that you are looking at what this should not include. And sorry, it says a transaction for 5,000. We always try to adjust that so it's very generic, since that's our limit at UNR. But just so not anything that's over the P card limit from there. And there are some exceptions from there, but that's usually the general case. Anything that you should be using a P card for. So if you have like or software maintenance agreements, you have ongoing purchases that should be on a blanket purchase order, or any transactions that have an associated contract. You should also not use an SIR if you are just reimbursing like an employee or a student, of course, or a guest speaker, independent contractor, since that's a different process. And then, of course, if you're purchasing any of the goods and services, those should all be on a requisition if those qualify. So we do see, I think it's been a little bit better now, but we still do see some requisitions coming through that are for like those certifications and memberships or different types of permits, and they have to go through the whole approval process. And so if you want to limit that and be able to pay those off right away, you can use the SIRs for that. Usually the buyers will be really good at letting you know like, hey, did you know that you can use this instead of going through the requisition, or this qualifies for this? Or if you ever have any questions, definitely reach out and we can help you through, because I know sometimes it could be tricky to know what should be on a requisition or what should actually be on a SIR from there. Any questions on that? Really brief overview. Now we get to move on to requisitions. So there's several different types of requisitions that you can enter into Workday. So the two primary ones that we always concentrate on are the goods and services, and then also our open-ended blanket purchase orders. We also have guest speakers and independent contractors. I'm just listing those out. TMCC does a great job, and you guys have your process of the guest speakers and independent contractors. But just make sure that it's really important when you are choosing the correct requisition in Workday that you're making sure that you are putting like a goods on a goods requisition, that you make sure that if it's an independent contractor, it's for an independent contractor one, a requisition. And then if you ever have any questions on that, always reach out for that, of course. Make sure we have everything. Okay, so we'll go over these different requisition types, especially like goods and services. So if you're purchasing goods only, so like equipment or materials, those tangible items that you're going to be receiving should be received by quantity, what you're purchasing. Services are not tangible and are received by dollars. So those are different on how those look from there. With services, it will always be that we're going to require that you check for insurance. If it's going to be provided on NSHE owned property, that's a really good indicator on there if it's going to need insurance. And it needs to be current and on file. And we'll talk a little bit more about insurance and my COI and how all that information works before they can actually do that work on campus, because we do get those that do an after the fact, and that service has already been done. So it's important that we're making sure that insurance is on file and has been completed. We definitely encourage you, if you're not sure on whether the insurance or not will be required, definitely reach out. You can reach out to us, or you can also start with NSHE Risk Management just to kind of see ahead of time before you do all the work and go around to see if that's going to be able to qualify for that and if they need that, because sometimes it could be waived and maybe they don't need that process, and you can add that onto the requisition. We'll talk a little bit more about insurance and the importance of insurance later. We always share some examples of why it's important to have insurance, of things that have happened on our campuses. So we'll go over that here in a little bit. And then, of course, you have blanket purchase orders. So, of course, this is for ongoing purchases. So it could be something that's happening monthly, like janitorial services, any kind of ongoing service that should be a blanket for a certain amount of time, whether that's for the fiscal year or the calendar year. And then it's also based on the estimate of the annual spend that you don't have a hard quote for. So maybe you have to say, oh, okay, I'm going to set this amount. It's going to be about $1,000 a month. So you have an idea of what you're going to spend over that amount of time. Again, if you are wondering what you should pick, if it's someone that you haven't worked with before and you're wondering what you could do, again, reach out to the buyers to ask if this is the best route to go or how much you should be adding on there. And then you can also do it based off an estimate of what you spent in the past. So let's say you're doing like janitorial supplies and you're just kind of taking that best estimate of what you should be encumbering for those requests that will be coming through. Just to note that blanket purchase orders must be on a service line. So even regardless of what's being purchased, even if it's a goods, it has to be on a service line when it comes to purchase orders. That's how the process works in Workday. And then, as I mentioned, with independent contractor and guest speakers, you definitely want to make sure with those that they are in SREG are registered as an individual / sole proprietor or single member LLC. That's how you know if that's going to be an independent contractor and not on a service or goods or service requisition. So it's really important they check in SREG or follow through to find out if that is the case from there. We do, I think it just went in production. We do have an error that will come up to let you know if you're putting it on a goods or services requisition, and it shouldn't be on that. And it should be actually an independent contractor. We actually have an error that will come up that it should be put on an independent contractor requisition instead of that goods or service one. Any question on those? Quick little overview. Some of you know this pretty well, but good to understand the differences of all those. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we always just supply this because I always think of when you're starting to do any kind of Workday process, it's always important to have all that information that you can gather, just because of the stopping and like trying to find that information. And as we talked about with insurance and licenses, it's important to start gathering that information beforehand, knowing if it's going to require insurance, if it's going to require business license, anything that may delay you, because we try to turn these around as quick as possible and work our magic. Our buyers are wonderful, but that's not always the case. So even though we're in a cloud-based system, it's not going to happen within 24 hours all the time, especially on those service requisitions. So it's important to make sure that you're finding all the information that you need to gather before you're putting in those requisitions, so you can make sure you're putting on the right requisition. You have all the information that you need. So these are just some suggested, this is not everything that you would need, but some suggested items as you are putting together a requisition. And then just so you know, any of these resources, especially if you're new to any of these processes, on the Workday training resources, we do have how to create a requisition for goods, create a requisition for services. We also have creating FY26, and we'll be updating that soon. Same process, but we update the information for FY27. I can't believe that'll be here before we know it. For the blanket purchase orders. And then also we have information on the freight and shipping and other charges. So if you do come across that, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit about freight here in a moment.
Desi, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah, please do.
I just wanted to reiterate a little bit that just because a supplier is in approved status in SREG does not mean that we here in purchasing have everything that we need in order to process a requisition. So that's why sometimes there is a little bit of a delay between when you submit your requisition and when we actually get a purchase order issued, because sometimes we need a Nevada business license. If it's like $25,000 or more, that's not always going to be uploaded to SREG. So it's like additional things that we need to check for. And insurance is not tracked through SREG, and it's not linked to our MyCUI platform in SREG. So they're separate entities. So I just want to reiterate that just because they're approved in SREG does not mean that they're approved for the other requirements that we need.
Thank you, Jamie. That's a great point, because I know you guys see that a lot and it comes through. Like I said, it's not automatic, so it's important to check on all those things. And so just a couple slides on just things to keep in mind as you're working through these requisitions, just like as Jamie just noted on there. You also want to make sure that you have all the backup documentation that's required. So that way it also doesn't delay you, because if you already did the work to find out some information, or if you had an exception and an approval, if you already have that information uploaded, then that's less time that the buyer has to come out and reach out to you and find out information if you have all that. So make sure you have all the required documentation for your purchase. And then whether you just have one quote or you have multiple quotes, you want to make sure you have all those also attached in there. If you're requesting a competitive exception, sole source, you want to make sure that it's completed and it's signed, and that it definitely contains a justifiable reason for that sole source, not just because you're like, well, I don't want to go out to bid, I don't want to do anything. Make sure that it's actually justifiable reason. Any unsigned contract, and Adria will go over briefly about contracts towards the end, but just make sure that our office is responsible. And then if through TMCC, like she said, you guys do a great job on those. So she'll go over all that information and making sure on who the signature authority is for all those contracts, and she'll talk more about that. Other things that would be attached is like, let's say, a signed host form. You have a print release if that's required. Any kind of other separate documentations. You want to make sure those are separate, is what I meant to say. So that way you don't have them all bunched up in one. So that way we can understand which ones are the quotes or which ones are contracts. And then especially if any of those need to be forwarded, it can make sure that it's out separate. So we're not looking through bulk information. So that way we can piece out what each of those documentations are. And then also keep in mind that any equipment orders that are going to become assets or sensitive equipment need to be ordered by quantity, and they cannot be split. Another thing that you'll have to remember, that if you're trying to split by multiple accounts, you want to make sure that's something that's going to be done on the back end after the purchase order is processed. And you want to use the unit of measure as opposed to trying to lump everything together. So it just makes your life a little bit easier. And these items should be itemized to match the quote. And then also here we have use of the internal and supplier memo boxes. So those fields, you want to make sure that they're for the buyer and supplier. So a good example of utilizing these would be if the order requires a deposit. So that's something you can put in the internal memo field. That is also helpful because then it calls out to the buyer that a deposit is also required. And if we have some information out on the Workday training resources, but if you need any help on any of those deposits, and if it's necessary to do and you have questions on that, reach out to the buyer so we make sure that we do it properly. And especially if it's kind of a rush thing and you're like, oh, I have to do this deposit. That way everyone is aware on there. But we also use this mechanism for approval for whoever the work tag manager is. So that needs to approve the requisition so they can see that note that there is an approved deposit. We typically don't like to pay deposit as much as if we can get away from that, that's great. We understand there are some that really require it. If it, like I said, if it's needed and the supplier is really pushing back on it, work with the buyer and then make sure that it is justifiable, and then they'll work with you on making sure we get that all settled and done. For, let's see, make sure we got everything here. For any software purchases, you want to make sure you're following accessibility guidelines, and they want to make sure that it follows all the guidelines and it's approved and in Workday ahead of the time. So that way we can make sure the accessibility is done before we get processed. Oh, gosh. Sorry, the computer I'm on is very sensitive with and now it's delayed. Okay, there we go. Perfect. And then also, please try not to split lines. If you're needing to split the cost between multiple accounts, a good example would be like, let's say on the blanket purchase order, please make sure you're entering separate lines in Workday because it does not work well with splits. We've discovered that early on, and it causes a lot of headaches and a lot of issues, especially at the end of the fiscal year when we're trying to close things out. So even though it's an option in there, we really want to make sure that we avoid those. And so if you have any questions on that, definitely reach out so we can make sure we're doing that a correct way and then have the separate lines in Workday instead of trying to do those splits from there. Especially we see the issues when it comes to a change order. We have a lot of difficulties with that, and the Workday processes doesn't like that, and it causes a lot of issues and a lot of work that happens when it comes to the splits. And then also for the last reminder, sometimes it's pretty obvious, but we do get this question sometimes, is about making sure that you're only adding one supplier to a requisition. And perfect, I see a note, Tiffany, thank you for that. For accessibility, please reach out to Web College or myself, Tiffany from DRC. Thank you, that's very helpful. We'll make note of that too for our future TMCC slides, thank you. And please contact TMCC AP if you make a note of deposit on a rec. We'd like to keep track of those deposits. Thank you for the extra notes. We always appreciate that. Okay, and then just a few other keep in minds. This is more about freight than anything. So just a few different reminders on there of making sure that whether it's an asset or for setup or labor and installation charges, just so you make sure that you understand which ones to do and how to break it out. We do have additional information on our Workday training resources. Job aid, it goes over the freight and shipping and other charges, and it has it broken out between all of these and how you should be able to handle those depending on where that amount is from, gives you some reminders, and then also again on if it is for setup and installation. So really brief information on there because we can go on forever on these ones, but okay. Any questions so far? Anybody want to add anything that you've noticed you've seen on freight that's not on here? Perfect. So that's requisitions in a nutshell, but we know that there's sometimes some exceptions like emergency purchases. So just real quick, just emergency purchases of goods or services can be approved when there is a current threat to the health and safety or welfare to the public. So any emergency request, I guess if it's like we're going to rain and we got all this snow, a popular one is flooding. So if we have some flooding that happens, you can immediately email Sarah, our director, so that way you can give her a heads up that you do have an emergency that we need to verify the insurance and licenses that are current and on file and kind of immediately start getting started on all that. As you reach out, this gives everyone a heads up. They'll reach out at that time to obtain insurance or licenses if needed, but they'll give conditional approval via email for the work to commence, even if the quote may not be available. So that way, since it's an emergency, just like we said, as I said before, that it has to be a current threat to the health and safety or welfare to the public. Once the requisition is in Workday, a copy of the email approval from our purchasing department should be attached along with the final quote or invoice for the goods and service. And we just want to emphasize that having that email approval on there helps with making sure there's nothing delayed, and also helps because it could take a few weeks before all of this gets submitted, and then we might be like, was this really an emergency? Does this get it approved? So it's helpful to have that in there. And then it's just helpful to speed the information along if you are able to make sure all that information's in there, ensure the suppliers get paid. We want to make sure that we have all the relevant documentation for that emergency. So just so you know, in case it happens. And the last thing about requisitions is hopefully, how many of you actually use the requisitions app? You can put it in chat, smiley face, maybe put a sad face if you've never heard of the requisitions app. You may find your requisitions a different way using archives, favorites. Oh, I love when I see smiley faces. That's good. It's a little bit more known. I love that. Okay, I have one sad face. I'll take one sad face. So just in case you didn't know about the requisition app, this is in your general navigation menu. And so then if you go to the apps, if it's not listed there, there is one called My Requisitions. Kind of does similar items, but you're going to want the requisitions one. The requisitions app, if you need to add it, you can go ahead and just click on the Add app and look up requisitions and add that to your general navigation menu. So that way you can access that. This is just going to show information on the requisitions that you process. So if you are a main, let's say fiscal officer, you're not going to be able to see everyone in your department that has done requisitions. This is going to come especially for the ones that you have initiated. But what's great about this is you have everything in one area. And so as you have ones that are open, the example I have on the slide only shows completed ones, but if you have on the tab that's open, you could be able to see all those different open requisitions on there. And you can also see where kind of it's at. If it's being completed, you can also look down and do the down arrow to find out more information on that and be able to see if it's been tracked in or been issued into a PO yet, because maybe it's in the middle of that process, and especially on the completed side. So very helpful just to kind of get a snapshot of where everything is at if you need it. And you can also start a requisition from there. In the near future, whenever that happens, we kind of still do the process where you can kind of create requisition and put in the search bar. And there's kind of a couple different looks if you do it through the requisition and then if you do it through the search bar. But going in the future, just like if you did in the requisition app and said create a requisition from the app, it kind of has a different format layout. I actually like that layout a little bit better. But just so you know, in the future, that's how the layout will always look, and we'll have communications on that whenever it comes down to it. But just so you know, if you do it a couple different ways, it may look a little different from there. But definitely utilize this requisition app. It can be very helpful if you need more information about it. And there's a great video out there too, also a job aid. This is through NSHE, so it's on the Workday training resource, but you just go to the main portion of it and say all categories, and you can look for the requisition worklet. Or you can also click on this link and it'll take you to that information. They did a really good overview process of that one. All right. Before we get to the purchase order process, anybody have any questions or comments or anything they want to add before we move on? Wonderful. Trucking right along. So the purchase order process. So this is just a nice little visual. Of course, there's many more things in between all of these, but this is just a visual to get a high level understanding of just kind of that purchase order process. The reason why we have like the little go on the purchase order is actually processed is because some people think, well, I turn in the requisition, then we can go ahead and start everything. As Jamie was talking about earlier, that we want to make sure that we have all the insurances, business licenses, everything. Are they approved vendor? Can we go through with everything? So we want to make sure all that's happening before we're actually having those services happen or we're receiving those goods. So it's really important that we're making sure that we're going through the entire process and not just saying, well, I initiated the requisition and it's done from there. So with this, again, high level, it could be some things in between this, but of course, depending on how you need to get started, whether it's a quote or we went through the thresholds of different things that you would need. You want to gather the information needed. We talked about that earlier on the things that you should gather. You want to make sure that supplier is in supplier registration system, that they are registered, everything is approved. And then, of course, we just talked about initiating that requisition and pushing that through. Of course, as it goes through, you want to make sure you're gathering all that information, insurance, anything like that before it gets to the buyer. But of course, the department manager, it'll go through all the approval information, and then it'll arrive at the buyer to review and approve. And again, just because it's with the buyer review, as Jamie mentioned before, this can take some time to go and find this information. We have to check our MyCOI to make sure that they're approved in SREG. Is everything looking well on our end? Do they need a business license? So this spot can be a holding pattern there for a little bit. Again, it's not going to just happen in 24, 48 hours kind of thing. So make sure you're planning accordingly. And then when you hit that go sign of that purchase order is issued and processed, then that's a good sign that you can go ahead and start with the services, and then those goods are ordered from there. So
can I jump in again for just a second?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say we've had a lot of internal changes within VCM purchasing in the last month or so. So we have staff departing, staff arriving. And so I just wanted to put out there that we are processing a little slower than normal. We don't like it, but we are doing our best. And because we have to get it right, we can't just rush through everything. So I just want to let you guys know if you're noticing some sluggishness and getting recs turned into POs, it's not because we're ignoring you, but we have a lot going on right now. So please do be patient where you're getting to it. We haven't lost it. We'll get to it as soon as we can. And you're welcome to follow up, but just know we're just in we're slowed down right now as we're getting new hands, equipped to handle requisitions, and we've lost some folks. So yeah, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, April. That's a good, please have patience on us. And especially, this is good timing right now. At least we can have this time to have everyone trained and go through all these items before it's fiscal year. But it's always good to have that note, even if we weren't going through this transactional period, because it does take a little bit depending on what is needed for these areas. So great note to add. So thank you so much. That's a great question, Veronica. Adriel or Jamie, do you want to answer that? Preferred certain time frame for follow-up?
I would say a standard turnaround time for a requisition in our queue is about 48 hours. I would say right now, give us like another day or two. Just while we're in this transitional period, things are a little bit sluggish. So I think around the 3 or 4 day mark, if you haven't seen any traction or we haven't reached out to you about a purchase order yet, or a question or a follow-up or anything like that, then go ahead and reach out to us.
Perfect. Thank you. And that's a great question. Thank you, Veronica, for asking that question. Very important. We get some people that will submit it and it's barely even gone through all the approvals, and they're asking why the PO is not issued yet. So make sure you're looking at those business processes too, and tracking that and seeing where it's at. Another question that we get a lot in our BCN purchasing email, we know that we've been through some transitions and we've had people retire, terminated, and left, and you don't know who to reach out to. Always reach out to BCN purchasing. We're happy to help. But also, if you want to know who the buyer is, as I talked about before on our contact us page, if you can't go and locate them by the spin category, or let's say it's a miscellaneous spin category you're using and all you see is X as the buyer, that means it depends on what is being bought, that it's going to go to a certain buyer. You can go and look at our contact us page and be able to find that information and say, oh, okay, I need to reach out to Jamie because it is dealing with scientific. So in case you're waiting, so that way you don't have to wait for BCN purchasing to get back to you, you can find that information there, because I know it's hard on the requisition. It doesn't say who the buyer is yet until they have actually started to initiate that. So either go by the spend category, or you can go by that general responsibility area and find out where that buyer is listed. And so then you can reach out to them. And again, if you're like, I don't know, they will always point you into the right direction, or us at BCN Purchasing. Usually it's me, but me or Kenna, who are overseeing that email, we will point you in the right direction from there. But again, give it that time. Make sure you check the business process. Also, I've had people say, well, what's going on with my requisition? Actually show them how to make sure to go into Workday and look at that requisition. You can go down and scroll on the bottom and see on that service or goods line and scroll over and see that there's already a PO number there. We've had that quite a bit too, where people think that a requisition's not done. You can see successfully completed on the top and then be able to go scroll down there and be able to see that purchase order. So then you can see that that requisition's been completed and what the purchase order number is too.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw in there too, if you look at the processing history and you see that the requisition is with purchasing, it will say all the buyers' names. And I'm listed as a buyer, but I'm not a buyer. And in fact, I work part-time at this point. So I will get emails and I feel bad, but they'll sit for a whole day before I respond to them and say, hey, I'm not actually the buyer on this requisition. So do use the links that I just posted in the chat to look up, or reach out to BCM Purchasing to find out, because if you email me, it's possible I won't be able to get your email forwarded to the right person for a whole day. So the process history will tell you this, yes, it's with purchasing, but it's not a good place to check which buyer has it. If that makes sense.
Yes, and thank you for adding those links. Those are also available in our slides too, so you have those resources, and it's very helpful from there. And then, of course, just to finish our visual, you will receive those goods, the services will be done, and now it's time to pay those invoices. So make sure that you are doing the create receipt process, and then make sure we have in there close PO if completed. Just make sure, especially as we approach the end of the fiscal year, at least at UNR, I announce if they want to see any open POs. I can also offer that to you all too if you need to see any open POs, or you can reach out to your main contacts at TMCC to view any kind of open POs, because sometimes those get left. So if it's you need to actually close or discover those funds, it just doesn't automatically close if it is not the exact amount that's on that invoice. So make sure you're keeping track of those and close that PO if needed. And again, you would go out and look at that PO. And I know that you guys submit things through a form. And so if you're trying to look to see who that buyer is, on that PO and submit it directly to them. But I know that maybe there might be some that are still open to, like, let's say Ryan Fitzgerald or Betsy Brownfield. You can go ahead and email BCN for that to BCN purchasing, and we'll match you with the correct person that can actually process those for you. Yes, and good point there, Adriel, especially if it's one that you just need to close it. You just want to make sure you close those, because we have a lot of people that just leave them hanging out there. So especially towards the end of the fiscal year, it's a good time to start closing all of those and double check. So that way you can disencumber those funds. It'll automatically disencumber once you close it. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about tracking POs, talked about tracking the requisitions. So we've seen the requisition app, and then also you can go and see through your archives, look at that business process. And like we said, use the spend category list to find the buyer if it's not listed on the requisition yet, or the general responsibility area on our contact us form. But then ways to actually track the purchase order. There's a few different ways. Some people have the way that they like to do it. Some like to do a report. Some like to go through their archives. Maybe you have them favorited and you can go through and look at that PO, and you've already added it to your favorites. But of course, I showed you the requisition app. That'll help. You can see it linked to that purchase order and be able to find it. I mentioned how you can look at that purchase order again. If you only have the rec, you can scroll over on that goods or service line and be able to see what that PO number is, add it to your favorites, or go through your archives and find it. Because sometimes you will receive a notification when that's been issued, but a lot of times we all miss those notifications, right? So those are different ways that you can go ahead and find that information. I just want to note too, especially as we're going through a transition, but if you had anybody that left your department or they've left campus entirely, and the requester needs to be changed on any of those purchase orders, please reach out to that buyer that processed the purchase order, or BCN purchasing if it's someone that is no longer here. That way we can make sure that we do a mass change and we catch all of those. Everyone usually does a really good job of letting us know ahead of time. That makes it easier, so that we can go through and we run our reports and we find out all the POs that are there or that are in transition, so that way we can make sure that we change those and not have any issues from there. And then again, you can go through the requisition apps to track your purchase order. You have your archives and your favorites. And then there's also Workday reports that you can utilize. You can use those even if in the parentheses it says UNR, but those are helpful ones that you can look up and be able to find information about your purchase orders from there. And I see chats firing off, so thank you. Oh, perfect. Adriel answered those. Great questions. Perfect. Thank you, Adriel, for answering all of those. And then another part of the tracking is checking if the PO is paid. So that one is very important also. So of course you would usually just go directly to that purchase order. And then right on the top, and the screenshot shows that. It'll show if it's been paid in full, if it's partially paid, it's been closed. Like Adriel said, if we need to reopen something, we can. But that is how on top of that purchase order, you can see where it's at if it's fully paid or partially paid. That way you know what's available on there. You can also go to the balances tab and to review the balances. That'll also show you what's been paid and what is left over from there. Adriel talked about reopening the PO in the chat there. Again, reach out to the buyer if that is something that is needed, if it's something that's closed and something creeps up, that happens here and there. And then you also have any cost center managers can run the report in Workday on invoice purchase orders to be able to see any of those that are pending from there. Okay, I see nothing else in the chat. We do have a job aid on checking if the purchase order is paid, so it goes in a little bit more detail than what I just showed you right now. And then the last part that we went over on that visual is creating receipts. I won't go into too many details on this one because there's a job aid on there. Going through and how to create receipts, just make sure that you're ready to receipt and that you have the correct invoice from there before you're processing those. You're going to create the receipt in Workday. And that way you can show that the goods have been receipted and then, or the services have been completed. The people that can create receipts are the original requisition requester or the financial administrative assistant, or we call them FAAs, for that cost center. A receipt indicates, again, whether the goods or services has been completed, and it does require that the supplier invoice be uploaded and attached, and it won't let you move on without that. So make sure you are putting the correct invoice in there. We've seen that sometimes where it's the incorrect one or the numbers do not match from what's being processed. And then once it gets submitted, of course, it goes to the accounts payable for review and approval, and then they'll create the supplier invoice form from there. One of the things that happens sometimes if you try to create a receipt, whether you go to create receipt from the search bar or you go directly to that PO and you try to create a receipt and it doesn't let you, likely there's already a draft receipt available already out there. Maybe someone created it and forgot about it. That either needs to be edited or canceled, so that way you can actually start a new one. So if you don't see that, the most likely is the issue from there. If that is not the case, definitely reach out and then we can try to figure out if there's a different exception from there that's happening. Let's see here. Make sure we have, try to create, or please note that all the draft receipts are canceled on a monthly basis. So those are all cleaned up. So that way, if there's a bunch of draft receipts out there, I know some people like to do a bunch of draft ones, then you're going to come back to them. But on a monthly basis at the end of the month, if nothing's been done with those, we do clean those out so we can keep all that clean and not have them piled up. And definitely make sure that if you need to initiate a change order, we're going to talk about change order here in a moment. TMCC does a really good job. You have a lovely form that goes to us. Just make sure you're initiating a change order for that if needed. And again, in the training resource, there is information on this entire process. So I'm just going to briefly talk about change orders. Like I mentioned, you all at TMCC do a wonderful job. So Veronica and all of them that send them to the buyers or the BCN purchasing email, you guys have a great form and have all the information that's in there. So in our requesting a change order to existing purchase order, the one that you have in the Workday training resources hasn't been updated to the one that we updated for UNR. We had to add some extra information because we don't have a request form through us that is processed. So we wanted to make sure everyone is actually including all the information. So we used to have a change order form that used to be a paper-based and it had all our buyers on it, and it's old. So definitely don't use that. But TMCC has a great form that you use that you forward on to. So email sufficient, or that change order form that you use has all the information that you need to be able to put in there. Of course, these change orders are to increase funds or to switch work tags that need to be, and these need to be approved by individual that have the signature authorities for that specific work tag. So we will go and check that and make sure. Make sure that you're getting any of those approvals beforehand. Again, TMCC does a great job with that with your change form before it comes over. We always get all the approvals. We always get all the attachments. So we thank you for that. That is very helpful. Approvals not needed for decreasing funds or to close a PO, as we just talked about. If you are increasing funds, just make sure you have all the backup documentation needed on that for the goods and service PO, and you're having all that documentation and everything is in there. And then also, if it's an increased PO that total exceeds the specific amount threshold, and we talked about those thresholds earlier, requiring additional quotes, that buyer will reach out to you if you are not already supplying those and talk about the process for that PO. But again, your form is great. And you guys do a great job of making sure that you're finding the buyer. Again, if the buyer on the PO is someone that is no longer here, feel free to email to BCN Purchasing, because we do, even if you submit it to the buyer, that you get it from that general area of responsibility. You're like, oh, it's scientific, I'm going to forward it to Jamie. Jamie will still go ahead and process those, but we do have some others like Fred Harvey who temporarily help us. So sometimes they take care of change orders. So that way we relieve some of the duties of the buyer. So it's just not a lot going on. But email BCN Purchasing if you're not sure on who you should send those to, but just make sure you're directly sending to those buyers, because that is going to be a faster way to get through those change orders than emailing BCN Purchasing, and then we have to route it to that buyer, and then we have to explain it. So it kind of takes a little bit, especially if we need a little bit more than 24 hours to get to those emails. We're usually quick on it, but just in case we're out or it's a busy day, we just want to make sure you're directly working with that buyer is always helpful. And I see that we put the TMCC change order form link on there. Thank you, Veronica. It's a very lovely form. We really appreciate you guys being on top of that. Everything that comes through is very already there, and it's easy, and your change orders go through fast because of that. All right, any questions before this is kind of like the last part of it. I'm just going to briefly go through these so then Adriel can talk about the contracts. So all we have left is just information on insurance requirements. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but just so that you have some reference points when it comes to these. Anything to add or anything before we go on to this last section before we're done? Perfect. So we've talked about insurance quite a bit through the training. But we just want to talk a little bit about the insurance requirements. So of course, insurance is required for any service provided on NG-owned property, and definitely needs to be current and on file with purchasing. Just so you know, as we kind of already talked about, we at purchasing are the middle person between all of these, between the suppliers and risk management. So we try to play nice in the sandbox and make sure everyone's known, but that can take a little bit sometimes when we're trying to make sure we're the middle person, trying to make sure everything is done. So we do make sure that there's compliance with that, and my COI definitely helps us. So on the next slide, I won't go into too many detail on that so we can wrap up, but it goes through the information of what we go through with my COI from there. So that does really help us, but definitely if you have any questions on the insurance before you are putting in the requisition, definitely reach out to NG Risk Management. The information is located on the bottom, so that way you can make sure that you're consulting with them, what is needed. And then if you have any questions on the My COI, definitely reach out to BCN Purchasing, and we can make sure that we help you with any of that if a supplier is having issues or doesn't have their current information that is on there. So this just goes over all of our standard minimum insurance requirements. Of course, there's a lot of other information in between all of this, but just so you know what our minimals are from there. We have information out on the insurance requirements for BCN. So it's on the UNR site, but it covers all of BCN. And then we also have a knowledge base article that talks about obtaining insurance for services performed on NG property, and it address the My COI and other information from there. So very helpful resources. Again, reach out to risk management. We at purchasing can help, but we also play kind of that middle person. So sometimes it's best just to go straight to risk management. And then just briefly on My COI. So this My COI system is responsible for tracking and verifying all the certificate of insurance and making sure it meets our requirements. So very helpful system. We will continue to use that until we transition to Supplier Gateway. And so it'll be nice when everything's in one spot, but My COI definitely does help us so we can keep track of those. This just goes over the full process from there. Just want to quickly note, and Adriel might jump in here too, but just that we are working with the departments that are close with working with those vendors, because sometimes the vendors don't know, like, I don't know what's needed. And sometimes they might be able to connect us directly with their agent faster. Maybe we have the wrong agent. And so sometimes we have waited our 2 weeks and we have not heard anything. And then we have to put a stop to things. So just to make sure we get the insurance quickly, we will work directly with the department contact that's on the requisition. And then we will also try to find the best contact, because sometimes those agents, it could be multiple agents. We want to make sure we have the correct ones and they're supplying those items in My COI.
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quick on insurance also and say it is not a perfect system. We're trying our best to make it as painless as possible for everyone involved to meet risk management's requirements. But I wanted to note, like, yes, we will be phasing out My COI hopefully as we will be as we start our new registration system. We just don't know exactly when that will be. So for the time being, My COI is still collecting the majority of our insurance requirements. And when it works well, it works really well. All it is we ask you for the contact information from the supplier, and we start an email that automates the whole process if they understand it. And often they do. We can get insurance back in hours. We have gotten it that fast before, same day. Other suppliers have a harder time. They don't trust the email. They think it's spam, et cetera. And then it becomes convoluted, and it's easier to manage obtaining certificates and approval outside of the My COI system. We will do whatever is more efficient and works better for everyone. So we'll start with My COI because that's the most painless if everyone figures it out. If it's not, we'll start handling it manually. And then generally speaking, we've instructed our buyers to try to step out of the manual process only because it makes it take longer, the more parties, the more cooks in the kitchen. So if My COI is not an option because of the supplier, or actually, and we didn't mention this, My COI can't collect or ask for software cyber liability. So if your purchase requires cyber liability, we have to do it outside of the system anyway. If we need to do it out of My COI, the buyer will instruct the department and say, hey, you need to get these certificates and you need to get them approved through risk. So then you would be responsible to ask your risk department, what exactly is required, and then to communicate that with the supplier, get the certificates. And then what you'd eventually send to the buyer is the certificates themselves and an email of approval from risk management. And that's just so we have it verified, because we're not insurance experts in understanding how to read everything. So we rely on risk management to verify that the certs actually meet the requirements. So that's what it would look like. And our big dream and hope is that risk management will be more directly involved in the new registration system, so that there's just a lot less back and forth for everyone in getting what we need for insurance in the future.
Thank you, Adriel. Great additional notes on there. Like she said, we will try to do anything we can to get these going. I know we're close on time. We always try to do an hour and a half for these trainings. So if you do have to jump off, please do. We just have 2 last little sections here, just going over just some quick examples, just showing you pictures, business licenses, and then Adriel's going to talk about contracts. So if you can stay on for a few more minutes, great. If not, we understand if you do have to leave. Again, we'll share the recording and the slides with all of you, so that way you can go back through and review these items. So just really brief, we love to share these all the time because some people are like, oh, I have to do insurance. And this came from UNR Risk Management, and they were able to share this with us. But this shows how it's important to make sure that there is insurance because you never know what's going to happen. So this first one happened at our UNR honors court. This person wasn't having a great day, and they caused damage from this. So this is why it's important, because this all had to be replaced, that we wanted to make sure that we had the business auto liability insurance, and that way the UNR Foundation wasn't out of pocket for all this information. Another one was a lovely FedEx truck. I think was trying to do too much of a turn and it kept sliding down. And so it was going towards our Manzanita Lake here. But it was also causing damage to the grass, and it could cause damage to anybody that was walking nearby. So again, never know what can happen just even with simple deliveries. And then another one was a DRI truck that caught on fire due to the grass and brush that lodged up between the engine and the skid plate. So lots of damage there. So that's why it's important that we make sure we have insurance. So these are just some really brief, quick examples of it. But sometimes it helps to have a little bit of visual of why it's important that we have these items, that we have insurance. That way we can make sure that everything is covered and that we protect our interests and, of course, the interests of the university and the colleges that we're at. So that way we're not coming out of pocket from there. These are a lot of reference points. Of course, we're running out of time, so we don't have a lot of time to go through all of these, but we've kind of briefly touched on having business licenses. Make sure if you need to see these and do searches and check on business license and see if it's required. It's important to have all of these websites bookmarked. So all these links go out to what our terms and conditions are when it comes to business license. And also if you do need to search through the Nevada Secretary of State on if that vendor or person has a business license before you're hiring. And just a note for any purchases of services exceeding $25,000, BCM Purchasing verifies that a company holds a valid and current state of Nevada business license, as well as they're not suspended, barred, or ineligible from entering into contracts. So it's very important that we're keeping track on those, and we're checking sam.gov and making sure that we are allowed to do work with them. Then also you have the Nevada Contractors Board's license search. It also has all the classifications. One of the new job aids that we have on there is in the Workday training resources. There's required license certification, and it breaks down on depending like if it's landscaping, any of the general licenses and certifications you need. It breaks down all that information in one job aid, so that way you can have a reference point for that too. And then also our State Public Works Division and bidder qualification. Again, very important information here on these websites there. We just want to make sure that we are doing it prior to soliciting a quote, and you're following all the policies and information on that. Again, we could go into more details on this, but this is a good reference point for any of this that you're going through on any of these bidder qualifications. And then lastly, the A&E licenses. So this has a link to the Nevada State Board of Architects and also linked to the Nevada Board of Professional Engineers. So definitely important. These are another ones that need to be on file with purchasing prior to the work actually commencing. So important to make note of all of those. And so just to end, the last thing we have is resources after contracts. So again, if you have to leave, we're just revamping or going over all of those resources, but I'm going to hand it over to Adriel to just briefly talk about contracts.
All right, we're in the home stretch. And the good news is this will not be on the test. This is more just history for fun and to just give you some insight into how contracts work around here. So what is a contract? You probably are handling, if you're purchasing items, you're probably handling more contracts than you realize. It's really any agreement between two or more persons, which creates an obligation to do or not do a particular thing. So essentially a quote. You can get a quote and it looks like it's just giving you the amount of money and you're going to pay it. But if you sign it and it has any terms, sometimes there's like a back page or just a few little lines that says, you know, terms and conditions of this quote. how long it's valid for. All those things make it an actual contract. It doesn't matter if it has the word contract in it or agreement in it. It could be called anything, so long as it is two or more people agreeing to do or not do a particular thing. It's a contract. And the contracts that we are interested in at BCM Purchasing are contracts where we are purchasing something. So anytime we are using NSHE funds to procure something, that's a contract we are interested in. So the only legal entity name we have for signing contracts, just so you know, is the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education. That is our legal entity. And then they delegate beyond that. So for Truckee Meadows, you're going to see over and over on your contracts when they're signed, maybe not when they get sent to you. Sometimes they'll send it to you and just say, we're agreeing with TMCC to do this. That doesn't work. TMCC is not the legal entity. NSHE, the Board of Regents is of NSHE. So if you want to help your contracts team, you can edit your own contracts to at least have the legal entity name correct, which is written there. They can add, if it's like for a specific department inside of TMCC, you can always add and it's whatever department, or to make it more specific, but you don't have to do that. So who signs at TMCC? If it's a purchasing contract, it's generally signed by the president or VP Michael Pearl. And that's because the only signers for the Board of Regents is the Board of Regents, but they delegate to the chancellor. And then the chancellor delegates to all the institutions, so like UNLV, UNR, TMCC, Great Basin. They all can sign up to $3 million for a purchasing contract at the president level. Now, the president of each institution delegates differently, so it's different at every institution. And at yours, it's generally the president or Michael Pearl who signs for you guys. And that's all outlined in your own policies and procedures. So for you, you're probably even more familiar than me because you run this internally, is you would send your contracts for review and signature to contracts@tmcc.edu to be walked through the process internally. That would include even if they're over $3 million, because contracts@tmcc.edu would properly route them. So even if it's over $3 million, the chancellor has to sign. The chancellor won't sign unless the institution's president has recommended it to him. So it's still going to go up through your president no matter what. And contracts do take some time to be signed because they get reviewed by the general counsel to make sure the legal terms are okay, that we followed all the NSHE policy. Any TMCC specific rules for contracting are met. And just in case there's other departments that need to be coordinated with, like IT. And then if they are worth over $3 million, they will take longer because they get sent up to the chancellor's office, and again are reviewed by the chancellor's general counsel and anyone else who has to be involved. So if you do have a contract, especially it's a higher amount or over 5 years, the chancellor also signs anything that's over 5 years. Get it in as early as you can to avoid as much delay as possible in getting your purchase done. So over here at BCN, because we know that you guys sign your own contracts and review them, if we get a contract sent to us in a requisition that isn't signed, we'll assume it doesn't have to be signed. We do process a lot of POs where we do not sign the quote, even though it has terms and conditions, and there isn't an expectation actually from the supplier for us to sign it. So we accept the quote, we make the PO. When we issue our PO, that is actually a legally binding contract. It comes with our terms and conditions. And as soon as the supplier draws funds off of that PO, that is their acceptance of our terms and conditions and contract. Now, that said, sometimes they'll come back after the PO is issued and say, we can't agree to this. We need you to sign this. We will help you guys figure that out. We'll work with contracts to help figure that out. If you do need a signature and you've submitted the rec to us, we will contact your contracts at TMCC to handle it, because that's how TMCC does purchasing contracts. And so for the most part, this is just nice to know. Your big action point is just to email your contracts email address if you need one reviewed and signed. So that's it for contracts today.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions on contracts? If you do, you have time to ask away while I go over resources. So to wrap up everything, we've talked about all these different resources throughout all the different slides and linked to job aids and information that you need. We've talked about this a lot about the spend category assignment. So make sure that on our BCN purchasing website that you access those so then you know what spend category to actually apply and buyer to reach out to. Make sure you're bookmarking the BCN purchasing website that has the helpful purchasing guidelines on there, the spend category assignments, and on our contact us page on the next slide, we have that information that Adriel linked in the chat regarding the contact us information. So then you know which buyer to reach out to if you are not certain on what spend category that you are going to be using. We talked about Workday training resources a lot. This is available for you. So it's available for anybody in the North for BCN. That you can access it through your Workday general navigation app. Go to the Workday training resources and then click, you scroll down and you'll find BCN purchasing resource and be able to click on that page. That's going to list all the different job aids that are in PDF so that way you can access them. I just asked to make sure we've had this at other institutions before. People have taken that link and then put it on their website. We have it in Workday training resources because it has to be, any Workday processes have to be behind a single sign-on. It has to be protected. So we want to make sure that if you use those links, make sure not to put it on a public website because it will just go to a PDF instead of actually making someone log into Workday. So we want to make sure that we're just using the link for Workday training resources. So it actually prompts somebody to log into Workday to make sure they should have access to it. So just in case you are sharing those around at TMCC, make sure not to have them on a public website. Just have the Workday training resource link, not the individual ones to each of those job aids. And then this is just our contact us. Again, bcnpurchasing@unr.edu if you're not sure which buyer to reach out to or the certain contact. And then again, on our contact us page, you will see the information of who to contact. And we have all of our new buyers that are on there. So our website has been updated. So it has the contacts on there. So I'd like to thank you so much for sticking around a little bit longer after noon and being able to ask great questions. Hopefully this was a very helpful training, either as a refresher or for those that were new. So I want to thank you and thank Adriel and all of our buyers that were on there. And again, I will share this recording and the slides with all of you. I will reach out to the TMCC contact and we'll make sure that this gets shared with all of you. So thank you so much again. And we'll stick around for a little bit just in case you have any other questions. Thank you.